stable factor. And when we look at PostNL as a B2B and a B2C organization, you face different challenges at Eventbrite, where you mentioned that we had product, you had product marketing, you had marketing, everyone had their own journey. What did it mean for you that the journey was the one stable factor in this context?
Yes. So just a bit of context on my my position as well. Like, there's a lot of similarities, Rob, that I recognize from what you're saying. Terms like BU, business units, and we were quite a large organization. The difference, though, is for us is that I came into an organization where customer centricity was sort of in the DNA of the company, being advocated by executives. So senior management was really aware of the importance of customer centricity, and that trickled down into the whole organization. So whether it's product or a CX or sales, like, everybody was fully aware that we needed to keep the customer front and center of every decision that we made. The challenge I ran into, though, Jochem, as we talked about, is when I came into the company was split into different business units, and it was sort of like, here are your 5 teams. You are now responsible for the B2B side of the product. Good luck with it. So there was no cohesion in those teams. It was just like 5 random teams. There was a team focusing on a mobile app, and one was working on onboarding, and one was SEO. So it was sort of a mix of teams. And somewhere along the journey, we IPO'd, so we went public, which generated a lot of cash in the company. And basically, the CEO sat down with me and said, we want to invest in a department, but how are you going to scale? Like, how, do you have a plan to scale your department? And my honest answer was, well, not really, but let me think about it. So I started talking to, well, first I started sketching on a whiteboard. It's like, okay, so how do I sort of make a plan from these 5 teams? What makes sense, and how can I organize these teams in such a way that it allows me to scale? And then, scaling in my situation meant I had teams across 3 different continents. So, like, I needed to create alignment, communication, and then they need to work in the same direction. So, how could I sort of create that situation for the teams?
Was there a clear leadership involved? Was the leadership at your department, at product team, or was it somewhere else? Like, Rob has clear CX focus, which is broad, but was that something that you had at Eventbrite as well?
Well, it was leadership per business unit, I would say. So within the business unit, there was leadership, and then within that business unit, you can see it as sort of like a mini company within a company. And I was sort of the CPO for the B2B side of the business. I'm using a lot of acronyms, but I'm assuming that the audience knows all these abbreviations. There was definitely support from senior management.
Ruben, I'm interested to hear, you indicate, I guess, that customer journeys could also have helped basically create focus within these teams, so that you don't have one team doing an app and another team doing something else, and without realizing how it all contributes to each other. Has it also succeeded in bringing efficiencies internally, in terms of doing less things that you don't need, or doing them more effectively? Can you talk to that a bit, or?
I think mainly in terms of efficiency, I would say, because if you give teams ownership of a specific stage of a customer journey, then and you make sure that they're really close to the customer, and they truly understand, like, the part of the customer journey. And you give them autonomy, you make it a cross-functional team. In our case, that meant, like, product engineering design, but also, like, I tried to incorporate CX in that team as well, a data analyst, a UX researcher. It was a luxury position because it was a big company, and we had all these different people for different positions, but they were truly cross-functional teams. And they were able to really dig deep into the issues that customers were facing in those different steps of the journey, and also come up with sort of holistic solutions to those problems.
Yeah. And one final question before I think is a good bridge to Eva in a second. But was ownership? Did you manage to effectively assign ownership there as well? I can imagine that And when everybody's kind of responsible for everything, it also becomes sometimes a problem that nobody's responsible for anything. So how did you make that transition?
Well, honestly, it is challenging because what we ended up with is almost sort of a hybrid model where we said that we have we called them lifecycle teams. So they were part of sort of they had the ownership of part of the lifecycle. But imagine if we also had strike teams. We call them. It was sort of more like project-based teams that were like, okay, now we need to fix things that could go across different stages of the customer journey. So we need to work with those teams. And align with those teams, align our OKRs to make sure that we're working in the same direction, but came up with sort of a hybrid model in that sense. So there's, we kept learning.